ballroom shimmered with golden lights, crystal chandeliers dangling like frozen fireworks above a crowd dressed in black-tie perfection. Waiters glided between tables, balancing trays of champagne flutes and silver platters. It was supposed to be a night of elegance, a company gala meant to celebrate success and new beginnings. But for Lillian Foster, it became the night her world shattered. At 7 months pregnant, Lillian still carried herself with grace. She had chosen a flowing midnight blue gown that draped softly over her growing belly. Though exhaustion tugged at her, she smiled politely as her husband, Daniel Carter, pulled her through the crowd. His grip on her wrist was tight, a little too tight, as if she were a mere accessory. "Smile, Lillian," he hissed under his breath. "Don't embarrass me tonight." She nodded, swallowing the sting of his tone. She had grown used to Daniel's sharpness, convincing herself it was stress from work. Still, she hoped tonight might soften him. After all, they were expecting their first child together. Surely he'd feel proud, protective. But then Sabrina Hale appeared. Tall, sharp-featured, draped in scarlet silk, Sabrina clung to Daniel's arm with the ease of someone who knew she belonged there. Her lips curled into a smirk as she glanced at Lillian's swollen belly. "Oh, Daniel." Sabrina purred loudly enough for nearby colleagues to hear. "Don't you think dragging a pregnant woman to such a glamorous event is outdated? Some women simply don't belong in places like this." Laughter rippled from a few corners of the table. Lillian's face burned, but Daniel didn't defend her. He laughed too. Then, in a moment that would be replayed in whispers for weeks, Sabrina lifted a silver bowl of salad from the buffet table. With a wicked sparkle in her eye, she tilted it forward. The contents, dressing, lettuce, cherry tomatoes, cascaded over Lillian's head and shoulders. Gasps echoed across the ballroom. Before Lillian could even react, Daniel followed suit. He seized a bucket of cold pasta from a passing waiter and dumped it over his wife. The room erupted in horrified murmurs, cell phones lifted to capture the spectacle. Lillian stood frozen, dripping, her hands instinctively cradling her belly. Tears blurred her vision as humiliation crushed her chest. She had been betrayed not in private, but in front of hundreds of witnesses. Across the ballroom, at a corner table, one man didn't laugh. Ethan Reynolds, a billionaire known for his secrecy, leaned forward, his sharp gaze fixed on the cruelty unfolding. Unlike the others, he didn't raise a phone to record. He rose from his seat, his presence commanding immediate silence from those nearest him. He moved toward her, unbuttoning his suit jacket, removing it in one swift motion. Draping it across Lillian's trembling shoulders, he turned his icy stare on Daniel and Sabrina. The room seemed to hold its breath. Lillian's heart pounded as she clutched Ethan's jacket around her body, his voice calm but firm. "What kind of man humiliates the mother of his child?" Ethan said, his words cutting through the music like glass. And in that moment, everyone knew the night was about to take a turn no one could have predicted. Before the humiliation of that gala night, before the cameras captured her pain, Lillian Foster had lived a life of quiet resilience. She was born and raised in Queens, the eldest daughter of Robert and Irene Foster. Her father was a retired subway mechanic, her mother a part-time librarian. They didn't have much money, but they poured every ounce of love into their 2 daughters. From a young age, Lillian learned sacrifice. She worked shifts at a corner cafe through college, saving every tip to help her family. By 24, she had earned a degree in education and began teaching at an elementary school in Brooklyn. She was the kind of teacher who carried extra snacks for kids who came to class hungry, who stayed late decorating bulletin boards, who listened when a child's world seemed too heavy. Her students adored her, calling her Miss Foster, with wide smiles and eager hugs. But behind her warm demeanor was a young woman yearning for stability. That was when she met Daniel Carter. He was confident, ambitious, dressed sharply in suits that whispered of success. To Lillian, he seemed like the escape from paycheck to paycheck living. He pursued her with flowers, promises of a brighter future, and the charm of a man who claimed he wanted nothing more than a family. Her parents had their doubts. Robert worried Daniel's eyes lingered too much on money and status. Irene noticed the subtle digs he made about Lillian's simple clothes or her modest career. But love can blur caution, and Lillian chose to believe in Daniel's better side. Within a year, They married in a modest ceremony. At first, life seemed manageable. They rented a small apartment in Brooklyn, and when Lillian became pregnant, she decided to step away from teaching temporarily. She dreamed of building a safe, happy home for their child. Yet as her belly grew, Daniel's warmth shrank. He came home later, his phone always buzzing, his words sharper. "You don't understand pressure," he would snap when she asked about work. Lillian tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was stress, maybe the burden of providing weighed on him. She reminded herself that once the baby arrived, things would change. Her closest friend, Maya Nguyen, a nurse at Brooklyn General Hospital, noticed the shift. "You look pale, Lil. You're carrying too much," Maya would whisper during checkups. But Lillian brushed it off, unwilling to admit even to her best friend that her marriage was cracking. Her parents worried, but she smiled through phone calls, pretending everything was fine. The truth was harder to face. She felt increasingly alone. Still, she carried hope. She decorated the nursery with hand-painted stars, read baby books late into the night, and prayed Daniel would soften when he saw their child. She believed family could heal wounds. That's why she attended the gala despite her exhaustion. She thought if she stood proudly at Daniel's side, radiant in her pregnancy, he would remember his vows. She thought love, or at least respect, might return under those sparkling chandeliers. But she was wrong. And the cruelty she faced that night would not only break her heart, it would change the course of her entire life. The silence after Ethan Reynolds' words was deafening. The gala, once filled with clinking glasses and laughter, now hung in stunned disbelief. Lillian Foster stood drenched in food, her gown ruined, her cheeks streaked with tears. Her trembling hands clutched the billionaire's jacket around her body as she tried to shield both her dignity and the fragile life within her. Daniel's face flushed with anger, but not with shame. He sneered. "She's overreacting. She doesn't belong here. This is my night, not hers." Whispers rippled across the ballroom. Phones continued recording, catching every cruel word. Sabrina giggled, brushing food from her manicured fingers. "Let her cry. Pregnant women are so dramatic." Ethan's expression didn't waver. He gestured to hotel security. "Escort Mr. Carter and Miss Hale out, now." The guards hesitated. Daniel was an executive at the company hosting the gala, but the weight of Ethan's reputation silenced their doubts. Within seconds, Daniel and Sabrina were forced toward the exit, shouting insults as cameras followed their disgraceful march. Ethan turned back to Lillian, his voice softened. "Let's get you checked now." Her knees buckled, the shock overwhelming her body. Maya Nguyen, who had been helping with medical support at the event, rushed forward. "Lil, we need to monitor her. She's 7 months." Within minutes, Ethan had arranged his private driver to bring them to Brooklyn General Hospital. As the limousine sped away from the glittering lights of Manhattan, Lillian sat in stunned silence. Food dripped from her hair onto Ethan's leather jacket, but he didn't flinch. He simply handed her bottled water and a folded handkerchief. "You're safe now," he said quietly. At the hospital, fluorescent lights replaced the chandeliers. Dr. Anaya Patel, her longtime obstetrician, met her in the maternity ward. "Lillian, deep breaths," she instructed gently, guiding her onto the bed. Nurses attached monitors, checking the baby's heartbeat. The rapid thump of life filled the room, bringing tears of relief to Lillian's eyes. "The baby is stable," Dr. Patel reassured, though her tone carried caution. "But stress like this is dangerous. You need rest and no more public confrontations." Lillian nodded, though her heart ached with betrayal. She had believed Daniel would protect her, not humiliate her. As she lay in the hospital bed, Maya leaned close. "You can't keep enduring this, Lil. This isn't love, it's cruelty." Lillian whispered, almost to herself. "I thought he'd change. I thought for the baby he'd be better." Outside the room, Ethan spoke with Dr. Patel and Maya. "I'll cover all her medical bills," he insisted, "and she should file a report. What they did was assault, and it endangered her pregnancy." Maya nodded firmly. "She needs protection." That night, when Ethan returned to Lillian's room, she was awake, staring at the ceiling. He pulled a chair beside her bed. "Lillian," he said softly, "you don't have to face this alone." Her eyes flicked toward him, filled with disbelief and hesitation. No one had ever spoken to her like that. With sincerity, not pity. And in that fragile moment, she realized that the man who had just stepped into her life might become the one to change it forever. News of the gala scandal spread faster than wildfire. By the next morning, the internet was flooded with shaky phone footage. Daniel Carter and Sabrina Hale laughing as they dumped food over a pregnant woman's head. Headlines screamed across gossip sites and business outlets alike. Executive humiliates pregnant wife at gala. Scandal rocks Carter's career. Pregnant woman saved by billionaire Ethan Reynolds. Everywhere, people debated, but one truth was clear. Daniel and Sabrina were now infamous. At the Carter apartment, Daniel paced furiously, throwing his phone onto the couch. "This is ridiculous. They're twisting everything. I was just having fun." Sabrina, lounging in his shirt, scrolled through comments with a smirk. "Relax, Daniel. People forget fast. We'll ride this out." But the comments didn't fade. They grew sharper, crueler, unforgiving. Sponsors pulled out of contracts at Daniel's company. His boss demanded answers. Even old friends stopped replying to his calls. Meanwhile, at Brooklyn General, Lillian sat in her hospital bed with her parents by her side. Robert's jaw was tight, his knuckles white as he clenched the arm of his chair. Irene gently stroked Lillian's hair. "You don't have to go back to him," Irene whispered. For the first time, Lillian didn't argue. Tears filled her eyes as she finally admitted what she had buried for years. "He doesn't love me. He never did. And I can't let our child grow up watching him treat me like that." Her father placed his hand on hers. "Then let's end it, sweetheart. Let's protect you and this baby." That same day, Grace Kim, the attorney Ethan had quietly contacted, arrived at the hospital. Sharp-eyed and efficient, she sat at Lillian's bedside with papers in hand. "Mrs. Carter," Grace began, "what happened at the gala constitutes assault. You have every right to press charges. But beyond that, you also have the right to free yourself from a toxic marriage. Divorce is your path to safety." The word divorce echoed in Lillian's mind. She had resisted it for months, clinging to the hope Daniel would change. But now she saw it clearly. There was nothing left to save. She signed the preliminary paperwork with trembling hands. Maya squeezed her shoulder, whispering, "You're stronger than you think, Lil." Across town, Daniel received the divorce notice in his office. His face drained of color. "She's actually going through with it?" he muttered. Sabrina rolled her eyes. "Let her. Once she's gone, nothing holds you back." But deep down, Daniel felt something he hadn't expected: fear. Back at the hospital, Lillian looked out the window as the city buzzed below. The weight of betrayal still crushed her, but for the first time in years, she felt a flicker of relief. She wasn't chained anymore. Ethan appeared in the doorway, quiet but steady. "You've made a brave choice," he said gently. Lillian met his gaze, her voice firm. "It's time to build a new life, for me and for my baby." What she didn't know was that Daniel and Sabrina were already plotting a desperate move to silence her. One that would test her courage more than ever. The videos from the gala didn't just go viral, they became evidence. By the end of the week, multiple witnesses had submitted footage to the police. The clips clearly showed Sabrina Hale lifting the bowl of salad, Daniel Carter dumping pasta, and both of them laughing as Lillian cradled her belly in shock. Detectives called Lillian to confirm her statement. Grace Kim sat beside her, speaking firmly. "My client was humiliated, endangered, and assaulted. She will cooperate fully with the investigation." Daniel tried to spin the narrative. At his company's board meeting, he insisted it was a misunderstanding. "My wife is emotional because of the pregnancy." But the board members weren't buying it. One of them slid a printed headline across the table: "Pregnant woman humiliated. Executive faces backlash." Daniel's face turned pale. Meanwhile, Sabrina doubled down on her arrogance. She posted a cryptic photo on social media, a glass of champagne, captioned, "Some people just can't handle the spotlight." The comments exploded with outrage. Sponsors pulled their contracts with the company, citing ethical concerns. Sabrina's smug confidence only deepened the public hatred. Lillian, however, struggled with mixed emotions. At night in the hospital, she whispered to Maya, "I don't want my child growing up hearing his father's name dragged through the mud." Maya held her hand tightly. "Lil, Daniel did that to himself. You're not destroying him. He destroyed himself. You're just telling the truth." Grace pressed forward. She filed a civil lawsuit on Lillian's behalf, demanding compensation for emotional distress, medical expenses, and defamation of character. The lawsuit made headlines, pushing Daniel and Sabrina into the eye of a legal hurricane. Court day arrived, and the air outside the courthouse was thick with reporters. Cameras flashed as Lillian stepped out, her parents on either side, Ethan following quietly behind. She wore a simple cream dress, nothing flashy, but her presence commanded respect. Inside the courtroom, Daniel sat with his lawyer, fidgeting. Sabrina crossed her legs, pretending to look bored, though her eyes darted nervously. The judge reviewed the footage in silence. Gasps filled the courtroom as the videos played on a large screen, exposing every cruel laugh, every sneer, every humiliating moment. Daniel buried his face in his hands. Sabrina muttered under her breath, "This is ridiculous," but her voice trembled. When it was Lillian's turn to speak, she stood tall, though her hands shook. Her voice was steady. "I came to that gala as a wife carrying our child. I believed I would be respected. Instead, I was treated like a joke. I'm not here for revenge. I'm here to protect my baby, and to prove no woman deserves to be humiliated this way." Her words pierced the room. Even the judge's expression softened. The gavel struck. The case would proceed, and Daniel and Sabrina would face both criminal charges and the civil lawsuit. Outside, reporters shouted questions, flashes exploding like fireworks. As Ethan guided Lillian past the chaos, she whispered, "What if they try to come after me? What if Daniel wants revenge?" Ethan's jaw tightened, because in the shadows of the courthouse, Daniel was already making a vow to strike back in ways Lillian could never imagine. The courthouse battle had only just begun, but the weight on Lillian's shoulders grew heavier with each passing day. Everywhere she turned, it seemed like the world knew her story. At the grocery store, strangers whispered, some offering sympathetic glances, others just curious stares. Online, her name trended alongside Daniel and Sabrina, dissected by millions who didn't know her pain. At night, when the cameras were gone and the hospital lights dimmed, the silence pressed down hardest. Alone in her room, with her unborn child stirring inside her, Lillian's composure cracked. She curled into herself, tears soaking the pillow as she whispered, "Why me? What did I do to deserve this?" Maya often stayed late, sitting by her side. "You're not weak for crying, Lil. You've carried too much alone." But Lillian shook her head. "I can't even protect my baby from his father's cruelty. How am I supposed to raise him? How am I supposed to be enough?" Her parents tried to lift her spirits. Robert reminded her, "You've been strong since you were a girl. You worked, you studied, you sacrificed. That strength is still inside you." Irene held her daughter's hands, whispering prayers every night by her bedside. Still, the pressure mounted. The media dissected her every move, what she wore to court, how tired she looked, even whether she smiled. Ethan shielded her as best he could, using his influence to block invasive stories, but the emotional toll gnawed at her. One afternoon, after yet another exhausting meeting with lawyers, Lillian collapsed in the hospital hallway. Nurses rushed her into a room, fearing complications. Dr. Patel checked her vitals, speaking sternly. "You cannot keep pushing yourself like this. Stress is dangerous for you and the baby. You need rest, or there will be consequences." The warning cut through her fog. For the first time, Lillian realized she couldn't carry this weight by sheer willpower. She had to choose differently, not just for herself, but for the child depending on her. That night, Ethan visited quietly. He found her staring out the window, her hands cradling her belly. "I feel like I'm drowning," she admitted softly. "I don't recognize myself anymore. I used to be a teacher who believed in light, in children's futures. Now I'm just broken." Ethan's voice was calm, steady. "You're not broken, Lillian, you've been wounded. But wounds heal, and when they do, they leave scars that remind us how strong we've become." His words settled in her heart, not as pity, but as a spark. For the first time since the humiliation, she allowed herself to imagine a future beyond the pain. She pictured holding her baby without fear, building a home filled with warmth, not cruelty. Tears slid down her cheeks, but this time they weren't only from despair. They carried a flicker of something new, resolve. She whispered into the quiet room, her voice trembling but determined, "I won't let Daniel define me. I won't let him steal my future. My baby deserves a strong mother, and I will become her." What Lillian didn't know was that Daniel, cornered and desperate, was preparing a stunt that would threaten to shatter her fragile strength all over again. Daniel Carter was a man cornered. His reputation had collapsed overnight. His company distanced itself from him. and sponsors were abandoning him in waves. But instead of facing his mistakes, he and Sabrina decided to rewrite the narrative. "This is about image," Sabrina told him one morning as she scrolled through her tablet. "We can flip this. We'll play the victims. Everyone loves a redemption story." Daniel looked doubtful, but desperation shone in his eyes. "What do you suggest?" Sabrina smirked. "We go public. We tell people your wife is unstable, overly emotional because of pregnancy hormones. We spin the gala as a misunderstanding. Trust me, the world is quick to believe a man in a suit over a crying woman." The very next day, a carefully staged interview aired online. Daniel and Sabrina sat side by side, dressed in muted tones, faces arranged in masks of regret. Daniel spoke with rehearsed sincerity. "The gala incident has been blown out of proportion. My wife, Lillian, is a wonderful woman, but pregnancy can be difficult. Emotions run high. We were joking around, and things looked worse than they were. I love my child, and I hope people give me a chance to explain." Sabrina added softly, "People don't know the whole story. It hurts to see the media twist everything." For a moment, some viewers hesitated. Doubt crept into comment sections. Was Lillian exaggerating? Was this just marital tension taken out of context? But then Ethan Reynolds made his move. He had stayed silent until now, quietly supporting Lillian behind the scenes. But when he saw Daniel and Sabrina smearing her on national platforms, his patience ended. Ethan rarely gave interviews, but this time he called a press conference. The room was packed with reporters. Cameras clicked furiously as the billionaire took the podium, his tall frame radiating authority. "Let me be very clear," Ethan began, his voice steady. "I was at the gala. I witnessed everything. What happened to Mrs. Lillian Foster was not a misunderstanding. It was not a joke. It was a cruel, deliberate act of humiliation against a pregnant woman, and I will not stand by while liars attempt to rewrite the truth." The room erupted in questions, but Ethan raised his hand for silence. He revealed that hotel security had preserved surveillance footage from multiple angles. "The evidence speaks for itself. No editing, no rumors, just the truth." Within hours, clips from the hotel's cameras were released. They showed Sabrina deliberately lifting the bowl, Daniel dumping pasta with laughter, and Lillian's visible distress. The staged interview collapsed under the weight of undeniable proof. Online, sympathy for Lillian surged higher than ever. Comment sections flooded with outrage toward Daniel and Sabrina. Sponsors now threatened legal action for breach of morality clauses. At the hospital, Lillian watched the news, her hands covering her mouth in disbelief. "He defended me? Publicly," she whispered, stunned. Maya grinned. "Looks like you've got someone powerful in your corner." But deep down, Lillian felt more than gratitude. She felt a stirring of hope she hadn't dared to touch in months. And as Ethan's loyalty became clear to the world, Daniel's desperation twisted into something darker, an obsession that would drive him to risk everything. For weeks, Lillian Foster had lived in the shadow of humiliation. She had been the pregnant woman mocked in headlines, the betrayed wife plastered across social media, the fragile figure whispered about in hospital corridors. But as time passed, something inside her began to shift. The turning point came one morning when she looked into the mirror of her hospital bathroom. Her face was pale, her eyes rimmed with exhaustion, her hair tangled. For a moment, she barely recognized herself. She touched her swollen belly, feeling her son's gentle kicks. A thought rose within her. If I want my child to be strong, I must show him strength. From that day forward, she made small but steady changes. With Maya's encouragement, she began short walks through the hospital garden, letting the autumn air fill her lungs. The nurses noticed her posture improving, her steps becoming firmer. She started journaling late at night, pouring her fears onto paper, but also sketching dreams. A safe home, a career revival, a future where she wasn't defined by Daniel's cruelty. Her parents watched the change with awe. Irene said softly one evening, "I see your spirit returning, Lillian. I see my daughter again." Robert squeezed her shoulder proudly. Ethan, too, noticed. Whenever he visited, he saw less of the broken woman from the gala and more of the determined teacher he once remembered from college. One afternoon, he found her sitting by the window, reading a children's book aloud to her unborn baby. Her voice was steady, even joyful. "He needs to hear stories of heroes," she told Ethan with a shy smile, "so he'll know he comes from one." Ethan's gaze lingered, but he didn't interrupt. He simply replied, "You already are that hero, Lillian." Meanwhile, Grace guided her through the divorce process. At each court session, Lillian held her head higher, refusing to let Daniel's glares break her. The media captured images of her walking into the courthouse in modest but elegant dresses, looking composed. For the first time, commentators praised her strength rather than pitying her weakness. Her quiet transformation spread beyond the courtroom. A local journalist reached out, asking to write about her resilience. Lillian hesitated at first, but Maya urged her, "Your story could help other women. You're not just surviving, you're inspiring." The article went live under the headline, "From Humiliation to Hope, a Mother's Fight for Dignity." It went viral, not because of scandal, but because of her courage. Messages poured in from women across the country, wives, mothers, daughters, thanking her for showing that survival was possible. Lillian cried reading them, but this time they were tears of empowerment. For so long she had felt voiceless. Now her voice was echoing farther than she could have imagined. Still, the journey wasn't complete. In quiet moments, she wondered what the future held. Could she truly build a new life? Could she protect her child from the shadow of his father's shame? As she placed her hand over her belly one night, feeling her son's kicks grow stronger, a knock came at the hospital door. She looked up to see Ethan, carrying something unexpected in his hands, a set of files, thick with documents. Inside those files was a revelation about Daniel's secret dealings, evidence that would shake the courtroom and alter Lillian's fight forever. When Ethan Reynolds placed the thick folder of documents on Lillian's hospital tray, she frowned in confusion. "What is this?" she asked, brushing her fingers over the neat stack of papers. "Evidence," Ethan replied simply. "Daniel hasn't just hurt you, Lillian. He's been hiding things that could destroy him in court." Lillian's heart raced. "What do you mean?" Ethan pulled up a chair, his voice low but steady. "My investigators dug into his professional records. Daniel has been falsifying expense reports, taking bribes from suppliers, and manipulating accounts at his company. It's fraud. If this comes to light, his credibility in your divorce case collapses. He won't just look like a cruel husband, he'll look like a criminal." Her first instinct was disbelief. "Are you sure? This isn't just rumor?" Ethan shook his head firmly. "These are certified financial statements. Bank transfers, emails, he's been sloppy. Sabrina has even been helping cover it up." Lillian's hands trembled as she flipped through the pages. The betrayal cut deeper than she imagined. Not only had Daniel humiliated her publicly, he had been living a lie behind closed doors. Grace Kim, her attorney, arrived later that evening. She examined the files carefully, her sharp eyes narrowing. "This changes everything. With this, we can pressure the court for an expedited divorce. We can also ensure custody of your child remains with you. Daniel won't have a leg to stand on once the fraud becomes public." But Grace warned, "We must move carefully. If Daniel realizes we have this, he might become reckless. Desperate men do desperate things." Meanwhile, across town, Daniel and Sabrina argued in their apartment. News of Ethan's press conference still burned in Daniel's mind. "He humiliated me. That billionaire is protecting her. He's ruining me," Daniel shouted, throwing a glass against the wall. Sabrina, less concerned with his rage, focused on her reflection in the mirror. "Calm down. You're still my ticket to success. Just keep your mouth shut and let me handle the spin." But then Daniel's phone buzzed with a message from an anonymous number. "They're coming for your financial records. Better watch your back." Panic washed over him. He knew exactly what that meant. Back at the hospital, Lillian sat in silence after Grace left, the weight of the revelation heavy in her chest. Ethan placed a reassuring hand over hers. "This isn't about revenge. It's about justice, for you and for your child." Lillian looked at him, her eyes filling with a new kind of determination. "I don't want his money. I don't want his name. I just want freedom, and I want the truth to be known." The following week, Grace filed a motion to present Daniel's fraudulent records to the court. The media caught wind almost instantly, sending reporters swarming around the courthouse once more. Headlines now read, "Daniel Carter under fraud investigation." The tide was turning, and for the first time, Lillian felt the scales of justice tipping in her favor. But as Daniel realized the walls were closing in, he made a reckless decision. one that would put Lillian and her unborn child in grave danger. Daniel Carter's world was crumbling, and he knew it. The fraud investigation was underway. His company had suspended him, and sponsors wanted nothing to do with his name. His once polished image as a rising executive had been shattered in a matter of weeks. But what infuriated him most wasn't the loss of his career. It was the fact that Lillian, the woman he once dismissed, now stood taller than ever with Ethan Reynolds by her side. At night, Daniel paced their apartment, his hands trembling as he scrolled through news articles, each headline cut like a knife. Pregnant wife finds strength. Billionaire steps up against abuse. His name was no longer tied to success but to shame. Sabrina grew restless, tossing her phone aside. "You're obsessing," she snapped. "Face it, Daniel, she's winning. You can't fight a billionaire. Maybe it's time you cut your losses." He glared at her. "You don't get it. That child, my child, is still hers. If I lose, I'll be nothing. I need to remind her who's in control." The words chilled even Sabrina. She leaned back, uneasy. "What are you planning?" Daniel didn't answer directly. But that night, fueled by rage and liquor, he made a reckless choice. He drove across the city, stopping in front of Brooklyn General Hospital, where Lillian was still under observation. Inside her room, Lillian rested, drifting between exhaustion and uneasy dreams. Ethan had just left after a late-night meeting, promising to return in the morning. Maya sat in the corner chair, reading, when a sudden banging rattled the door. "Lillian!" Daniel's voice boomed through the hallway. "Open this door. You think you can destroy me?" Maya froze, her eyes wide. Nurses rushed to intervene, but Daniel shoved past them, storming into the room. His suit was wrinkled, his tie loose, his eyes bloodshot with desperation. Lillian sat upright, clutching her belly instinctively. "Daniel, get out!" she cried, her voice trembling. He pointed a shaking finger at her. "You think you're strong now because Reynolds is protecting you? You think the courts will side with you? You're still my wife, Lillian. You and that baby, you're mine." Maya jumped to her feet, standing between them. "You need to leave right now before security drags you out." But Daniel only grew louder, his voice echoing down the hall. "If you think you can erase me from my own child's life, you're wrong. I will fight you until the end." By now, hospital security had arrived. They restrained him as he kicked and shouted, his words dissolving into incoherent rage. Nurses shielded Lillian as tears streamed down her face. Dr. Patel rushed in, checking Lillian's vitals. "We need to calm her down immediately. Stress could trigger early labor," she ordered. As Daniel was dragged out of the hospital, reporters waiting outside captured the scene. The next morning, the footage of his outburst went viral, painting him not just as cruel, but unstable. Lillian lay back against her pillows, shaking, Maya's arm around her shoulders. She whispered to herself, "I can't let him break me again. Not now." But what she didn't realize was that Daniel's reckless stunt had crossed a legal line, one that would soon bring the full force of the law crashing down on him. Daniel Carter's late-night outburst at Brooklyn General was the final straw. The moment the footage hit the news cycle, the world saw him not as a misunderstood executive, but as a dangerous man unraveling in public. Reporters replayed the clip on a loop, Daniel shouting that Lillian and her unborn child belonged to him, his face twisted with rage as security dragged him out. The following morning, Grace Kim acted swiftly. Standing beside Lillian in the courthouse, she filed for an emergency restraining order. "My client was harassed and threatened in a medical facility while 7 months pregnant," Grace told the judge firmly. "This was not only harassment, it was endangerment. She deserves protection, and she deserves it immediately." The judge wasted no time. With the evidence clear and Daniel's behavior documented on multiple recordings, the restraining order was granted. Daniel was forbidden from approaching Lillian, her parents, or the hospital. If he attempted to contact her again, he would face arrest. For Lillian, the decision brought a wave of relief. As she clutched the official paperwork, she whispered, "Finally, he can't touch me." But Grace wasn't finished. "We're also filing criminal charges," she explained. "Assault from the gala, trespassing at the hospital, harassment. Daniel won't just lose in divorce court, he could face jail time." News outlets devoured the updates. Commentators condemned Daniel's behavior, labeling him unstable and dangerous. Sabrina, once eager to flaunt their relationship, began distancing herself. On social media, she posted cryptic messages about toxic men and moving on. The public saw right through her. At his apartment, Daniel spiraled. He threw Sabrina's suitcase at the door, shouting, "You think you can just leave? After everything we've done together?" But Sabrina was already gone, unwilling to go down with a sinking ship. Alone, surrounded by empty bottles and unpaid bills, Daniel's anger festered into self-pity. Meanwhile, Lillian's world grew brighter. With the restraining order in place, she finally felt safe enough to breathe. Ethan visited often, bringing small comforts, a basket of fruit, a stack of children's books, even a soft blanket embroidered with her baby's initials. One evening, he sat beside her as she traced the tiny letters stitched into the fabric. "For the first time," she admitted softly, "I feel like there's a future waiting for me. Not just survival, but life." Ethan's eyes warmed. "You deserve that future, Lillian, and so does your child." Her parents noticed the change too. Irene told Robert in the hallway, "Look at her, she's glowing again. She's finding herself." Robert nodded, though his gaze lingered on Ethan. "And maybe she's finding something more." But the legal battles were far from over. Daniel still had lawyers, still had connections, and his pride refused to die quietly. As Grace prepared for the next court date, she warned Lillian, "We've won a battle, but the war isn't finished. Daniel won't let go easily." Lillian straightened her shoulders. She was no longer the woman who crumbled under his cruelty. She was learning to stand, and soon she would have to stand stronger than ever, because Daniel's next move would drag her family into the fight, threatening the very people she loved most. Daniel Carter had lost his grip on Lillian, but he wasn't ready to give up. With the restraining order keeping him away from her directly, he turned his anger toward the people who surrounded her. In his twisted mind, if he couldn't intimidate Lillian, he could at least shake the foundation of her support system. It began with Robert and Irene Foster. One evening, as Robert closed the family's small hardware store in Queens, he found a threatening note tucked under the door. The message was scrawled in messy handwriting, "Tell your daughter to drop the case, or you'll regret it." Robert's jaw tightened as he folded the paper, hiding it from Irene, but she noticed his clenched fists. "What is it?" she asked. He forced a smile. "Nothing, just bills." Deep down, though, fear gnawed at him. The next target was Maya Nguyen. Leaving her shift at Brooklyn General, she discovered her car vandalized in the hospital parking lot. The windshield was cracked, and across the hood, someone had spray-painted a single word: traitor. Maya's stomach dropped. She immediately thought of Daniel. When Lillian heard the news, she broke down in tears. "He's going after everyone I love," she whispered, her hands shaking as she sat in her hospital bed. Ethan, standing nearby, placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "This ends now. We'll involve the police. He's crossing every line." Grace Kim wasted no time. She filed reports for harassment and intimidation, strengthening the case against Daniel. "Every move he makes digs his own grave," she told Lillian. "Keep documenting everything. The law is closing in on him." But Daniel wasn't done. One night, Irene was driving home from visiting Lillian when headlights appeared in her rearview mirror. The car behind her tailed too closely, honking aggressively. Panic surged as she turned onto smaller streets, the vehicle still following. Only when she reached her driveway and Robert came out with a flashlight did the car speed away. Irene was left trembling behind the wheel. The attacks were psychological as much as physical, meant to wear them down, to remind them Daniel wasn't finished. Meanwhile, Sabrina kept her distance, but Daniel still clung to the idea she might return. He left voicemails, ranting about betrayal, blaming her for not standing by him. In reality, Sabrina was already courting new opportunities, distancing herself from the wreckage Daniel had become. Lillian's parents sat by her bedside the following morning, their faces etched with worry. "We'll endure this, Lil," Robert said firmly. "He can't break us." Irene added softly, "But you need to know, he's not just fighting to win, he's fighting not to lose himself." Lillian's chest tightened. She hated that her fight for dignity had placed her family in danger, but Grace's words rang in her ears. "Every move he makes digs his own grave." That night, as Lillian lay awake listening to her baby's heartbeat monitor, she whispered to herself, "He won't win. Not this time." But just as she began to believe Daniel's reign of terror was nearing its end, a shocking betrayal from someone she trusted threatened to unravel everything she had fought for. For weeks, Lillian Foster had leaned on her inner circle, her parents, her best friend Maya, her doctor, her attorney, and of course Ethan. She believed her fortress of support was unshakable. But in moments of high stakes, betrayal often comes from where it's least expected. The cracks began to show when confidential details from Grace Kim's legal filings somehow leaked to the press. Reporters published specifics no one outside the legal team should have known. The exact dates of hearings, portions of witness testimony, and even sensitive medical information about Lillian's pregnancy. Grace was furious. "This kind of leak undermines everything we're building," she told Lillian in the hospital. "Someone close to you is feeding Daniel's side." Lillian's heart dropped. "That's impossible. Everyone around me wants to protect me." But Grace shook her head. "Information like this doesn't just fall from the sky. Someone you trust is talking." Suspicion spread quietly. Lillian's parents denied any involvement, their shock genuine. Maya swore she hadn't spoken to anyone but the nurses. Ethan, with his resources, promised to find the source. Still, the tension in the room was palpable. Meanwhile, Daniel gloated. Meeting with his lawyer, he smirked as he scrolled through articles quoting lines from Lillian's sealed filings. "See? She's not untouchable. I still have ways in." The truth came out sooner than expected. Ethan's investigators traced the leak back to Linda Carter, Daniel's mother. She had been contacting reporters directly, feeding them sensitive information under the guise of setting the record straight. But the shock wasn't her involvement alone. Someone had been funneling her details from inside Lillian's own circle. That someone was Irene Foster, Lillian's own mother. When confronted, Irene broke down in tears. "I didn't mean harm, Lil," she confessed one evening, wringing her hands. "Linda called me, begging. She said Daniel was drowning, that he'd lose everything if the world didn't hear his side. I thought if I shared just a little, maybe it would calm things. I thought I was protecting you from his worst anger." Lillian felt her chest tighten, her breath catching. Betrayal from Daniel she expected. But from her own mother? It shattered her. "Mom, you gave him the weapon to use against me. Do you realize what you've done?" Robert stepped in, furious. "Irene, how could you? After everything he's done to our daughter." Irene wept. "I was scared. I thought if I cooperated, he'd stop coming after us." The room fell silent. Lillian turned away, tears streaming down her face. Trust, the one thing she had clung to, had been fractured. Ethan stood nearby, his expression unreadable. But his voice was steady. "This doesn't break your case. We'll tighten the circle. From now on, no one outside legal counsel and immediate allies gets access to sensitive details. Not even family." Lillian nodded numbly, though her heart ached. Her own mother's fear had nearly undone her fight. And as she struggled to repair that wound, Daniel prepared his boldest move yet, a direct attempt to claim custody of the child Lillian hadn't even delivered. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation. Lillian Foster sat with her attorney, Grace Kim, her parents behind her, Ethan quietly present in the gallery. She was already drained from weeks of hearings, her body heavy with pregnancy, but nothing could have prepared her for the bomb Daniel Carter was about to drop. When the judge called the session to order, Daniel's lawyer stood confidently. "Your Honor, my client is not only contesting the divorce terms, he is filing for preemptive custody rights over his unborn child." The room erupted in gasps. Lillian's hand instinctively gripped her belly, her heart thundering. "Preemptive custody?" she whispered in disbelief. Daniel rose to his feet, straightening his tie as if he were still the polished executive he once pretended to be. "That's right," he declared loudly. "That child is mine, and I will not allow Lillian or anyone else to erase me from his life. I am his father, and I have every right to raise him." Lillian's knees nearly buckled. Grace steadied her and immediately addressed the court. "Your Honor, this is outrageous. First, the child has not yet been born. Second, Mr. Carter is under active investigation for fraud, harassment, and assault against the child's mother. His record shows he poses a direct danger to both mother and baby. This petition is not about love. It's about control." The judge nodded gravely, turning to Daniel's side. Mr. Carter, you are currently bound by a restraining order. Do you understand the contradiction in demanding custody while being legally barred from approaching the mother? Daniel's lawyer tried to spin it. Your Honor, my client regrets his past behavior. But parenthood is a separate matter. He wishes to be part of his child's life and provide financial stability. Ethan clenched his fists in the gallery, biting back the urge to speak. He could see through Daniel's performance. This wasn't about fatherhood. It was a desperate attempt to maintain relevance, to hurt Lillian by threatening what she valued most. Lillian rose, her voice trembling but clear. Your Honor, the man standing before you dumped food on me while I was 7 months pregnant. He stormed into my hospital room screaming threats. He has humiliated me, endangered me, and traumatized me. No child should ever be raised under that shadow. The gallery murmured in agreement. Reporters scribbled furiously. The judge finally raised his gavel. The petition for preemptive custody is denied. Custody considerations will be evaluated only after the child is born, and in light of Mr. Carter's ongoing criminal investigations. Relief swept through Lillian like a wave, though her body shook from the confrontation. Grace whispered, "He overplayed his hand. This will only strengthen your case." But Daniel's eyes burned with fury. As he left the courtroom, he leaned close enough for Lillian to hear. "You think this is over? You're wrong. I'll find another way." And true to his word, Daniel's next move would bypass the court entirely. An act of recklessness that would put both Lillian and her unborn child in immediate danger. The courtroom denial should have been the end of Daniel's madness, but instead it fueled his desperation. Every day, his name appeared in headlines dripping with scandal. Sabrina had abandoned him completely, erasing his number and blocking him from her life. His mother avoided his calls, ashamed of his behavior. He was isolated, cornered, and spiraling. One rainy evening, Daniel parked across the street from Lillian's hospital. His car windows fogged as he stared at the glowing building, his hands trembling on the steering wheel. "She can't just erase me," he muttered, gripping a bottle of whiskey. "That baby is mine." Inside, Lillian was finally feeling a sliver of peace. She had spent the day reading children's stories to her unborn son with Maya by her side. Ethan had dropped by earlier, bringing her a soft blanket and promising, "You're almost there. Just a few more weeks, and you'll hold him in your arms." For the first time in months, Lillian had allowed herself to dream about the moment she'd meet her baby. But peace shattered quickly. Daniel stumbled into the hospital lobby, reeking of alcohol, his clothes soaked from rain. He bypassed security, shouting, "Where's Lillian? Where's my wife? I need to see my child." His voice echoed off the sterile walls, drawing gasps from patients and nurses. Hospital guards rushed to block him, but he shoved one aside, charging down the hall. Panic surged as staff called for backup. In her room, Lillian heard the commotion. Her heart lurched. She clutched her belly, whispering, "No, not again." Maya bolted to the door, locking it as footsteps thundered closer. "Lillian," Daniel bellowed, pounding on the door. "You can't keep him from me. He's mine." The pounding grew louder, each strike rattling her bones. Lillian gasped as sharp pain gripped her abdomen. Her breathing quickened. Dr. Patel and a team of nurses rushed in through the adjoining staff entrance. "She's going into premature labor," Dr. Patel shouted. "We need to move her now." The scene spiraled into chaos. Orderlies wheeled Lillian onto a gurney, rushing her toward the emergency ward as Daniel's fists pounded on the locked door behind them. Security finally dragged him away, kicking and screaming, his voice breaking through the halls. "You can't take him from me. He's my son." Ethan arrived moments later, having been called by Maya. His chest tightened at the sight of Lillian, pale and trembling, her hand clutching the side of the gurney. He ran beside her, his voice steady despite his fear. "I'm here, Lillian. You're not alone. Focus on breathing. You're strong. You can do this." Inside the delivery room, machines beeped rapidly, nurses barking instructions. Lillian's tears streamed as contractions seized her body. "It's too soon," she cried. "He's not ready." Dr. Patel met her eyes firmly. "Listen to me, Lillian. We're going to do everything to protect you and your baby. But you must fight with us. Right here, right now." And as the sterile lights blazed above her and her body trembled with pain, Lillian realized her fight for dignity had transformed into the most primal battle of all. the fight to bring her son safely into the world. The delivery room pulsed with urgency. Bright lights glared overhead, the rhythmic beeping of monitors filled the air, and the voices of nurses rose in sharp commands. Lillian lay on the bed, drenched in sweat, gripping the rails as another contraction ripped through her body. Dr. Patel stood at the foot of the bed, calm but firm. "You're early, Lillian, but your baby is strong. Listen to me. Focus. Push when I tell you." Ethan stayed by her side, holding her hand tightly. His palm was warm, steady, anchoring her to something beyond the chaos. "You're not alone," he whispered over and over. "You're the strongest woman I've ever known. You can do this." Tears blurred Lillian's vision as fear warred with determination. She thought of the months of humiliation, the countless tears, the moments she doubted herself, and then she thought of the tiny life she had protected through it all. "For you," she whispered to her unborn son, "for you, I will fight." Another contraction surged. She screamed, pushing with every ounce of strength left in her body. Dr. Patel urged, "Again, Lillian, one more," and then a cry. The sound pierced the room, high and shrill but alive. Nurses moved quickly, wrapping the tiny newborn in a blanket. "It's a boy," one of them announced, her voice carrying warmth through the cold sterility of the room. The baby was placed on Lillian's chest. Her sobs broke free as she cradled him, his tiny fists curling against her skin. "Noah," she breathed, naming him at last. "Noah Carter Foster, my miracle." For a moment, everything else fell away. The court battles, the scandals, the threats, all that existed was the fragile weight in her arms, proof that she had endured and triumphed. Ethan stood back, giving her the moment, his eyes glistening. Robert and Irene, allowed briefly into the room, wept openly at the sight of their first grandchild. Maya clutched her hands to her mouth, whispering, "He's perfect, Lil. He's perfect." But even as joy filled the room, shadows lingered. Noah was small, born weeks early. Nurses monitored him closely, noting his shallow breaths. Dr. Patel explained gently, "He'll need time in the neonatal unit. He's strong, but we must be cautious." Lillian nodded, though her heart ached as the nurses gently carried Noah to the incubator. She felt torn, relieved he was alive, terrified of what lay ahead. Ethan touched her shoulder. "He's a fighter, just like his mother." As she rested, exhaustion overwhelming her, news of Noah's birth spread quickly. Outside the hospital, reporters swarmed, eager for photos, desperate for headlines. Among them, hidden in the crowd, Daniel watched with hollow eyes. He had seen the news on his phone, the words "healthy baby boy" flashing across the screen. For a brief moment, genuine emotion cracked through his anger. He whispered Noah's name under his breath, as if the sound could tether him to the child he was rapidly losing. And as Daniel stood outside in the rain, staring up at the glowing hospital windows, he began plotting his most dangerous move yet, one that would threaten not just Lillian's peace, but Noah's fragile new life. For a brief moment, the world seemed to pause. Lillian Foster, weak from labor but glowing with maternal pride, had finally brought Noah into the world. Her heart swelled each time she looked at his tiny form in the incubator, fighting with all his fragile strength to breathe, to live, to grow. She whispered promises through the glass. "I'll protect you. I'll give you the life you deserve." The days that followed were a blur of hospital visits, sleepless nights, and cautious hope. Robert and Irene brought homemade meals, Maya helped with paperwork, and Ethan remained a constant presence, making sure Lillian had everything she needed. Though she was exhausted, she felt a strange peace she hadn't known in years. For once, Daniel wasn't hovering near her, wasn't mocking or belittling her. For once, she felt safe. But safety never lasted long when Daniel Carter was involved. From the outside, Daniel's world had collapsed. His career was gone, his finances frozen under investigation, and Sabrina had abandoned him completely. But beneath his desperation burned one thought: if I can't have Lillian, I'll at least have Noah. One night, Daniel met with a shady lawyer who promised him a loophole. "You're the father," the man explained. "The courts might deny preemptive custody, but they can't erase your parental rights. If you can show interest and present yourself as stable, you might claw back visitation, maybe even shared custody." "Stable?" Daniel scoffed, his hands shaking. "I've lost everything." "Then fake it," the lawyer said coldly. "Clean up. Show up. Play the victim. Paint Lillian as controlling, too emotional, Judges love fathers who fight for their kids. Daniel left the meeting with a new plan forming in his mind. The next morning, as Lillian held Noah's tiny hand in the neonatal unit, Grace arrived with urgent news. "Daniel's filing another petition," she said, her tone clipped. "He's demanding visitation rights as soon as Noah is discharged." Lillian's chest tightened. "Visitation? He nearly caused me to lose this child. How can he think he deserves to see him?" Grace sighed. "Because legally, he's still the father. But don't panic, we have strong evidence of his instability. The restraining order, the hospital incident, the fraud investigation, it all paints him as unfit. Still, we have to be ready. He's not giving up." Ethan stepped forward, his voice calm but resolute. "He won't win. We'll fight this every step of the way." But Lillian's heart still ached. She looked at Noah, so small and vulnerable, and whispered, "I won't let him hurt you. Not ever." Outside the hospital, reporters caught Daniel arriving in a pressed suit, hair neatly combed, pretending to be a grieving father, desperate for his child. Cameras snapped as he held up a photo of himself and Lillian from happier days, claiming, "I just want to be part of my son's life." The world began to split. Some viewers bought into his performance, others condemned him as manipulative. And as public opinion swayed dangerously, Lillian realized the fight wasn't just in the courtroom anymore. It was in the hearts and minds of everyone watching. Daniel Carter had always known how to wear a mask. When his career thrived, he wore the polished smile of a corporate star. Now, stripped of power and reputation, he reinvented himself as the picture of a wounded father. He hired a slick PR consultant who arranged carefully crafted interviews. Daniel appeared on talk shows, his suit crisp, his hair neatly combed. He spoke in a soft, rehearsed tone. "I've made mistakes, yes," he admitted, voice cracking. "But doesn't every man deserve a second chance? My only wish is to hold my son. I miss him every night." Clips spread online like wildfire. Commentators debated endlessly. Some viewers, swayed by his performance, argued at least he wants to be there for his child. Others, remembering the viral footage of the gala and the hospital outburst, condemned him as manipulative. But the damage was done. The narrative was no longer simple. Lillian, once universally pitied, now faced skepticism. Was she keeping a father from his child out of spite? Was she exaggerating his abuse? Lillian watched the broadcasts in disbelief, her stomach twisting. "He's turning the world against me," she whispered, holding Noah in her arms. The baby stirred gently, unaware of the storm surrounding his name. Grace Kim was blunt. "If we stay silent, Daniel controls the narrative. The court of public opinion matters. Judges read the news, jurors are influenced by it. We need to counter this." But Lillian hesitated. "I never wanted to be a public figure. I just wanted to teach, to raise my child quietly. Why should I bear my wounds to strangers?" Ethan leaned forward, his voice steady. "Because you're not just defending yourself anymore. You're defending Noah's future. If Daniel convinces people he's a victim, he'll use that sympathy as a weapon. Don't let him write your story." With a heavy heart, Lillian agreed. A week later, she sat in a studio under bright lights, cameras trained on her. Maya held her hand before the segment began, whispering, "Just tell the truth. People will feel it." When the interview started, Lillian spoke softly at first, but her voice grew stronger. "I was humiliated while carrying my son. My husband and his mistress poured food over me in front of hundreds of people. That wasn't a misunderstanding. It was cruelty. Later, he stormed into my hospital room, screaming threats while I clutched my belly in fear. That wasn't love. It was danger." Tears glistened in her eyes, but she didn't break. She looked directly into the camera. "This fight isn't about revenge. It's about protecting my child. No mother should be forced to hand her baby to someone who has proven over and over that he cannot be trusted." The studio was silent. When the interview aired, the response was overwhelming. Messages of support flooded in again. Women, mothers, even fathers who condemned Daniel's act and praised Lillian's courage. Hashtags trended, "Justice for Lillian, protect Noah." For a moment, the tide shifted back in her favor. But Daniel, watching from his apartment, smashed a glass against the wall. His mask of calm cracked, rage boiling beneath. And in that rage, he began plotting not just to win in court or media, but to strike at Lillian in a way far more personal and devastating. Daniel Carter's mask was slipping. The public had seen his staged tears, his carefully rehearsed apologies, but the sympathy he craved was fading fast. Lillian's powerful interview had tilted the scales against him, and the hashtags demanding justice for her gained momentum. But Daniel refused to surrender. If he couldn't win the court of law or the court of opinion, he would destroy her peace another way. Late one night, Daniel sat alone in his cluttered apartment, the glow of his laptop reflecting off empty bottles. His hands trembled as he scrolled through articles about Ethan Reynolds. The billionaire's name was everywhere. Mysterious CEO defends pregnant wife. Reynolds seen visiting hospital. Daniel's jaw clenched. So this is who she's replacing me with. Fueled by jealousy, he began digging. He called old contacts, desperate for dirt on Ethan. When no scandals surfaced, Daniel decided to create one. He leaked fabricated rumors to gossip blogs, suggesting Ethan and Lillian had begun their affair long before the divorce. "Teacher leaves husband for billionaire" became a toxic headline splashed across tabloids. The smear campaign rattled Lillian. Holding Noah in the hospital's quiet room, she scrolled through the articles with tears in her eyes. "They're painting me as unfaithful," she whispered, as if everything Daniel did never happened. Ethan reached for her hand. "They're lies, Lillian. People who matter know the truth." But Grace Kim was more pragmatic. "This smear is dangerous. Judges don't like scandal, even false scandal. We'll need to fight this with evidence." Meanwhile, Daniel took his retaliation further. One afternoon, Robert returned home to find the family's front windows smashed. A brick lay on the floor with a note tied to it. "You'll regret siding with her." Irene clutched Robert's arm, terrified. Maya wasn't spared either. She received anonymous calls at odd hours, filled with heavy breathing and silence. Though she tried to act unfazed, the tension wore on her. "He's trying to scare us into silence," she admitted to Lillian. The pressure mounted, but Lillian refused to break. Looking at her son's tiny face, she whispered, "I've survived worse. I won't let him win." Her quiet resilience only deepened Daniel's fury. One evening, Ethan invited Lillian and her family to a private dinner at his Manhattan penthouse. The view of the skyline glittered through tall windows, a stark contrast to the shadows Daniel cast over their lives. Over dinner, Ethan spoke warmly to Robert and Irene, assuring them, "You're not alone in this fight. My resources are yours." Lillian felt something stir inside her, a flicker of safety, of possibility. She saw how Ethan cradled Noah with surprising gentleness, how he smiled at the baby with real affection. For the first time, she allowed herself to wonder, could this be a new beginning? But across town, Daniel was already planning his next strike. Watching from the shadows, he saw Lillian leave Ethan's building, Noah bundled in her arms. His teeth clenched, his fists tightened. And in that dark moment, Daniel vowed that if he couldn't have Lillian and Noah, then no one else would. An obsession that would soon spiral into something far more dangerous. Daniel Carter was unraveling. Once a polished executive who spoke in boardrooms and wore tailored suits, he now spent nights hunched over in his darkened apartment, empty bottles at his feet, walls covered with articles and photos. Every headline about Lillian and Ethan was pinned like evidence in a twisted investigation. In his eyes, it wasn't just betrayal, it was a conspiracy against him. "She thinks she can erase me," he muttered, pacing the room. "She thinks she can parade around with Reynolds like I never existed. But I'll show them. I'll remind them who I am." His obsession grew with every passing day. He began following Ethan's schedule, hiring private investigators he could barely afford, tracking where Lillian and Noah were seen. He even paid a photographer to snap grainy photos of Ethan holding Noah, which he leaked online with captions like, "Billionaire plays daddy while real father is pushed aside." The images fueled public debate. Some defended Lillian's right to rebuild, others accused her of moving on too quickly. But for Daniel, the photos weren't about the public. They were about feeding his own delusion that he was still in control. Meanwhile, Lillian felt the weight of Daniel's presence even from a distance. She noticed unfamiliar cars lingering near the hospital. Once, while walking with Maya to a nearby cafe, she swore she saw Daniel's face in the crowd before he disappeared. Her chest tightened as she clutched Noah's stroller. "Lil, you're safe," Maya reassured. "The restraining order protects you." But Lillian shook her head. A piece of paper won't stop his obsession. Grace Kim urged caution. "We'll request heightened security measures. If he's stalking, we'll document it. Every move he makes is another nail in his case. Ethan doubled down on protection. He assigned 2 discreet bodyguards to Lillian, insisting, "You won't face this alone, not while I'm here." But Daniel wasn't just stalking, he was spiraling. He stopped eating properly, skipped meetings with his lawyer, and spent his dwindling money chasing shadows. At night, he stared at old photos of Lillian from their wedding day, his fingers tracing her smile. "You were mine," he whispered bitterly. "You'll always be mine." One evening, he parked outside Irene and Robert's home in Queens, watching their lights flicker inside. He imagined Noah's tiny face, imagined walking in and claiming what he believed was his. His grip tightened on the steering wheel until his knuckles whitened. Inside, Irene glanced nervously through the blinds. She couldn't see him, but she felt it, that unsettling sense of being watched. Lillian called later to check in, her voice soft but strained. "Mom, Dad, promise me you'll lock the doors. Promise me you won't let anyone in." They promised, but fear lingered. Daniel's obsession was no longer about custody, reputation, or even love. It had twisted into something darker: ownership, control, and vengeance. And as his obsession deepened, Daniel crossed a line that would transform his harassment into a crime so dangerous it could destroy not only himself, but everyone around Lillian. Rain poured down on Manhattan, slicking the streets in shimmering reflections of neon lights. Lillian Foster cradled Noah against her chest inside Ethan Reynolds' car, relieved after a long day of doctor visits. The baby had grown stronger, his tiny cries now louder, his grip firmer. For Lillian, every ounce of progress was a miracle. But in the shadows, Daniel Carter watched. He had tracked her routine for weeks, noting her appointments, the times Ethan's car arrived, and of even the security guards who now escorted her. Tonight, he was done watching. Tonight, he would act. As Ethan's driver pulled into the underground garage of his high-rise, a figure darted from behind a concrete pillar. Daniel, soaked, his eyes bloodshot, his movements jittery. Before anyone could react, he yanked open the rear door. "Give me my son!" Daniel roared, grabbing at Noah. Lillian screamed, clutching the baby tightly. "No, Daniel, stop!" Ethan lunged forward, shoving himself between them. "Get away from her!" he barked. The driver slammed the alarm, echoing sirens through the garage. Security rushed toward them, but Daniel's desperation gave him strength. He shoved Ethan hard, nearly knocking him against the car, and wrapped his arms around the blanket-swaddled Noah. The baby wailed, terrified. Lillian's heart shattered at the sound. "Please, Daniel, you're hurting him." For a split second, Daniel froze, staring down at his son. His lips trembled. "You're mine, he's mine." But his grip was clumsy, unstable, and Noah's cries grew louder. Ethan moved with precision. Trained in crisis protocols, his bodyguards tackled Daniel from behind, prying Noah from his arms. One guard cradled the baby safely, returning him to Lillian, while the other restrained Daniel against the cold concrete. Daniel thrashed, shouting incoherently. "You can't take him from me. He's all I have left." His voice cracked between rage and despair. Police arrived minutes later, cuffing him as he spit venom at Ethan. "You think you can replace me? You think money makes you his father? He'll know I'm his real dad. He'll know." But the officers weren't sympathetic. They listed his charges clearly: attempted kidnapping, violation of the restraining order, endangerment of a child. Daniel's face drained as the reality sank in. This wasn't just another scandal. This was a crime that could put him behind bars. Lillian collapsed into Ethan's arms, sobbing into his chest as Noah quieted against her heartbeat. Her entire body shook, adrenaline surging through her veins. "He tried to take him," she whispered in disbelief. "He would have ripped him from me." Ethan held her tighter, his voice firm. "He didn't, and he never will. Not while I'm here." Later, at the police station, Daniel sat in a holding cell, his hands covering his face. His once brilliant future was gone, replaced by concrete walls and the weight of charges he couldn't escape. But as Lillian finally felt a fragile sense of safety return, fate prepared one last cruel twist. Daniel's health would soon betray him, dragging him into a battle no courtroom could fight. The jail cell was damp and suffocating. Daniel Carter sat hunched on the narrow bench, his body trembling. At first, he thought it was withdrawal from stress and alcohol. But within days, the tremors grew worse, his skin pale, his breath shallow. When he collapsed during roll call, the guards had no choice but to rush him to the prison infirmary. Tests followed: blood work, scans, long hours of waiting. Finally, a doctor entered his room, his expression grave. "Mr. Carter," he said carefully, "you have an advanced blood disorder. It's serious. Without treatment, your condition will deteriorate quickly. With treatment, you can extend your life, but it will not be an easy road." Daniel stared blankly, the words echoing in his skull. Blood disorder. Serious. Not easy. His chest tightened, but not from rage this time, from fear. In desperation, he reached out to the only person he thought might still stand by him, Sabrina Hale. She arrived at the hospital wing days later, her heels clicking on the tiled floor, her expression carefully composed. Daniel reached for her hand, his voice cracked. "Sabrina, it's bad. They say I could die if I don't get treatment. I need you. I need us." But Sabrina's eyes were cold. She pulled her hand back, adjusting her designer bag on her shoulder. "Daniel, let's be honest. You're finished. You've lost your job, your reputation, your freedom. Now your health too. Why should I chain myself to a sinking ship?" His eyes widened in horror. "You can't mean that. After everything we've been through." She cut him off with a bitter laugh. "Everything we've been through? No, Daniel. Everything you dragged me into. I thought you were ambitious, powerful, but you're pathetic, and I don't do pathetic." With that, she turned and walked away, her heels echoing like nails in a coffin. Daniel called after her, his voice breaking. "Sabrina, don't leave me, please." But she didn't look back. For the first time in years, Daniel was truly alone. No wife, no mistress, no allies. Only his sickness gnawed at him, a cruel reminder of how fragile he had become. Meanwhile, news of his diagnosis leaked. The public, once enraged at his cruelty, now debated with pity. Some said it was karma, others argued no one deserved to die like this. But for Lillian, the news brought complicated emotions. Holding Noah close, she whispered, "I don't want him in our lives, but I don't want my son to grow up celebrating his father's death either." Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to forgive him, Lillian, but you also don't have to carry hate. Focus on Noah, on healing." Still, she couldn't stop the ache in her chest. Once she had dreamed Daniel would be a good father, a loving husband. Now he was crumbling, abandoned by the very woman he had chosen over her. And as Daniel lay in his hospital bed, staring at the ceiling with hollow eyes, he realized the one person he had destroyed most, Lillian, was now the only person left who might show him mercy. The hospital room where Daniel Carter now lived was nothing like the gala ballrooms he once frequented. The walls were bare, the smell of antiseptic hung heavy, and the rhythmic beeping of machines was his only company. His once commanding frame had thinned, his face gaunt, his eyes sunken with exhaustion. For weeks, he had no visitors. Sabrina had abandoned him, his colleagues avoided his calls, and even his own mother grew distant, ashamed of the son she no longer recognized. In the stillness of his sickness, Daniel confronted a terrifying truth. He was dying alone. One night, unable to bear the silence, he reached for the pen and paper left by a nurse. His hand shook as he wrote, "Lillian, I don't deserve your forgiveness, and I know I've ruined everything I ever touched, but I am sick, and the doctors say time is not on my side. I am not asking you to take me back. I only beg one thing. Please let me see Noah once before I leave this world. Let me look into my son's eyes, even if for a moment. Please don't let him grow up not knowing I tried, at least at the end." When the letter was delivered to Lillian, she sat frozen, staring at the words through blurred eyes. She read it once, twice, 3 times. Each line cut into her chest. Maya read over her shoulder, frowning. "Lil, you don't owe him this. After everything he's done, after the danger he put you and Noah in, you have every right to shut the door forever." But Lillian whispered, "He's still Noah's father. And Noah will grow up one day with questions. If I deny him this chance, will my son resent me?" Ethan, who had stayed silent, finally spoke. "You are not responsible for Daniel's redemption. That's between him and whatever conscience he has left. But you are responsible for protecting Noah. If you do this, it must be on your terms, with full safeguards in place." Grace Kim agreed. "If you let him see Noah, it will be under supervised visitation in the hospital with security present. You cannot be alone with him, not after the kidnapping attempt. If he truly is dying, then at least this ends with dignity." Lillian sat quietly, torn. Memories of humiliation, betrayal, and pain flashed before her eyes. Yet alongside them, was the image of the man she had once loved, the man she had once believed in, even if briefly. She thought of Noah's future questions and her own heart's need for closure. Finally, she nodded. One meeting. Supervised. Then it's over. A week later, arrangements were made. Noah, bundled safely in Ethan's arms, was brought to the hospital under heavy security. Lillian walked slowly beside them, her heart hammering as they approached Daniel's room. Inside, Daniel sat propped up against the pillows, his breathing labored, his eyes dull, until they fell on the tiny boy in Ethan's arms. For the first time in months, his face cracked into something unrecognizable, pure, unfiltered emotion. And as Daniel reached out with trembling hands, whispering Noah's name, Lillian braced herself for the most conflicted moment of her life. The hospital room was silent, except for the soft hum of machines and Daniel Carter's labored breathing. His once sharp, commanding presence was gone, replaced by a frail man who looked decades older than his 31 years. When his eyes fell on the bundle in Ethan's arms, his chest hitched. "Noah," Daniel whispered, his voice thin but filled with a longing that pierced the room. His trembling hands reached out, but they hovered in the air, uncertain, as if he knew he no longer had the right to touch. Lillian stood at the foot of the bed, her arms crossed protectively. Her heart pounded, torn between anger and pity. "This is under supervision, Daniel. You will see him, but you will not take him. Do you understand?" Daniel nodded weakly, tears welling in his sunken eyes. "I know. I need to see him before it's too late." Ethan stepped closer and carefully lowered Noah into Lillian's arms. She held her son tightly, then inched closer to the bed. Daniel's hands shook violently as he reached forward. For a moment, Lillian hesitated, but then, out of mercy, she allowed Daniel to brush his fingers against Noah's tiny hand. The baby squirmed, his little fingers curling instinctively around Daniel's. At that touch, Daniel broke. Sobs racked his fragile body, his tears soaking the hospital sheets. "I failed you," he choked out. "I failed your mother. I threw away everything good because I was blind and selfish. And now I don't deserve to call myself your father." Lillian's throat tightened. She had waited months for an apology, years for recognition of the pain he caused. Now it came, but it was hollow, arriving when his life was already slipping away. "You humiliated me when I carried him," she said softly, her voice trembling. "You endangered us both. You nearly destroyed me. And now you expect forgiveness?" Daniel's watery eyes met hers. "No," he whispered. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just want my son to know I loved him, even if I didn't know how to show it, even if I ruined everything else." For a moment, silence hung heavy. Ethan shifted uncomfortably, his jaw tight. Robert and Irene, standing in the corner, watched with mixed expressions, relief that Lillian had found strength, sorrow that Daniel had fallen so far. Finally, Lillian sighed, her voice quiet but firm. "Noah will know the truth one day. He will know the pain you caused, but I will also tell him you saw him once, and that you cried for him. That is all I can give you." Daniel nodded weakly, closing his eyes as tears slid down his hollow cheeks. "That's enough," he murmured. "Thank you." Lillian turned away, cradling Noah against her chest. She didn't look back as Ethan guided her out of the room, her parents following. For her, the chapter was closed. Behind them, Daniel's frail figure sank deeper into the bed. His breathing grew uneven, his body trembling as the machines beeped steadily. And though Lillian had chosen to walk away, Daniel's time was running out, faster than anyone realized. 2 weeks after their final meeting, the call came. Daniel Carter had passed away in his hospital bed. His illness had advanced quickly, leaving him no time for second chances. There was no dramatic farewell, no last-minute redemption, only silence, broken by the steady flatline of a machine that once fought to keep him alive. News outlets reported his death with mixed tones. Some called it a tragic fall from grace, a young executive consumed by ambition and destroyed by scandal. Others said it was poetic justice, a man who humiliated his pregnant wife, who tried to steal his son, undone not by enemies but by his own choices. For Lillian, the news brought complicated emotions. She sat quietly in Ethan's penthouse, Noah asleep in her arms. She stared at the city skyline, whispering, "I don't hate him anymore, but I don't mourn him either. He made his path, and he chose every step." Robert and Irene stood behind her, relief etched into their faces. "It's over now," Robert said softly. You can finally live without fear. Grace Kim confirmed that with Daniel's death, the legal battles were resolved. The restraining orders, the custody petitions, the endless hearings, all dissolved into finality. Noah's future was secure under Lillian's care. Justice has been served, Grace told her. Not in the way we imagined, but in the way life intended. The weeks that followed marked the beginning of healing. Lillian slowly returned to teaching, part-time at first, her students welcoming her with open arms. Noah grew stronger, his laughter filling every corner of her new home. For the first time in years, Lillian's days weren't measured by fear, but by love. Ethan remained at her side, not as a savior, but as a partner. He didn't push, didn't demand. Instead, he supported quietly, letting her set the pace. One spring evening, as the cherry blossoms bloomed in Central Park, he knelt beside her while Noah giggled in a stroller. "Lillian," he said gently, "I don't want to replace the past. I just want to build a future, with you, with Noah, with the family we could be." Her eyes welled with tears. She thought of the woman she had been, the humiliated wife, the broken mother-to-be, the woman drenched in shame at a glittering gala. And she thought of the woman she had become, resilient, fearless, standing tall with her child and her dignity intact. She smiled through her tears. "Yes, Ethan, let's build that future." Their wedding was small but beautiful, held in the garden of her parents' home in Queens. Friends, family, and even some of Lillian's students attended, clapping as Noah toddled down the aisle as ring-bearer. When Lillian walked toward Ethan, her gown simple yet radiant, it wasn't just a marriage ceremony. It was a declaration that she had survived and she had won. The story of Lillian Foster became more than gossip fodder. It became a testament shared online, in classrooms, and in women's groups everywhere. A story of betrayal, humiliation, and pain, transformed into triumph, justice, and hope. And as Lillian kissed Ethan beneath the blossoms, with Noah laughing between them, the world saw what Daniel never did, her true strength, her unbreakable spirit, and the family built not from wealth or power, but from love. So that's how the story closes, my wonderful friends. You're still here with me until the very end, aren't you? If you are, it means something in this journey touched your heart in its own way. Life teaches us, just as the Stoics reminded us, that we suffer more in imagination than in reality. Pain passes, but strength remains. Lillian's story shows that dignity and love can rise even from betrayal. If you felt her courage, share this video, like it, and subscribe to our channel, because together we'll keep finding healing, hope, and stories that remind us of our own power.